Live Fit Podcast, episode 110, Unlock Unlimited Power and Happiness with Pamela Gold.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Ah, yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And as a reminder, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to this episode, to this podcast, and maybe even more importantly, share it with somebody you care about, because what they learn from this episode and others just may help save their life. Because today I'm speaking with Pamela Gold. I loved having her on this show because she has a way of helping people unlock their inner and often hidden power. Have you ever tried to do something such as lose weight, get in shape, or improve your life in some way, but it just didn't work out? Why not? Chances are there's something about your approach or your inner self, maybe lack of confidence, lack of follow-through, maybe a lack of confidence in your follow-through, that stopped you. Pamela is going to help you unlock those powers that can help you not only have the confidence, but to follow through and really be the best you can possibly be. This episode is full of actionable tools that can help you increase your power and happiness in life. In addition to Pamela's vast knowledge, she brings a great positive energy, peace, and insightful stories. Not only was she fun to talk to, but she has an amazing insight on how people can live healthy, happy, and free lives. I started out intending to talk to her for half an hour, but it went twice that long just because we couldn't stop talking. And it's all very important stuff. There was no fluff. I tried editing it down, but I couldn't. So I hope you enjoy listening to her as much as I enjoyed speaking with her. How are you?
Good morning.
Good.
Sorry.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm great. How are you today, Glenn?
So far so good. It's been a wonderful day. Yesterday, a wonderful week. Just really loving the spring weather. We're getting some hot, warm days. We're getting some cooler days with rain. I rode my bike the other day, and it was just a nice speckling of rain, and the air smelled so good because the plants were getting wet, and it was. I gotta say, it was just sort of a blissful ride. I know that sounds
magic. Yeah.
Magic. And I know that sounds dorky to people who haven't experienced that sort of thing, but that's what keeps me going.
No, that's great. Being in touch with that sparking joy it's really powerful.
So, Pamela, you have a book called Find More Strength, 5 Pillars to Unlock Unlimited Power and Happiness. And I've been reading through this book, and I absolutely love what you have to say. But before we get into the details of the 5 pillars, because I know my audience wants to hear that, can you give us a little background on you and tell us what gave you the authority to write a book like this?
Sure. So it really is life experience, right? Like inner strength, spiritual strength. You can't go to Harvard or Yale and get a PhD. I mean, I actually did go to Yale, and I was a microbiology and biochemistry major there, and then science. But the stuff in the book is really life experience. And so, in life, as we're challenged, we always have the opportunity to take our challenges and learn from them, grow from them, and get to a deeper place of understanding of what really, makes life, successful, right? Like get a deeper definition of success and how we can, continue to be our authentic selves and be our best selves, because there's only one of me, there's only one of you, and we need to figure out how to be that in the face of things that are messy and challenging and painful. And so through my life, I've been lucky enough to have some challenges that did force me to dig deep. And at each of those points, I leveled up a little bit in terms of, understanding how I can be in touch with my deeper power and my deeper truth. And that's what eventually led me to write the book. So it's not that I, went to school for this and I did have some wonderful teachers, and I've, been a voracious reader, and I've studied philosophy and science and politics, obviously, and wellness and yoga. So many teachers taught me the things that are in this book. And there's nothing in this book that isn't ancient wisdom, for sure. But my ability, I think, to communicate it and connect it kind of with our everyday challenges, this has to do with my day-to-day, life experiences. I'm just another person that's kind of gone through some stuff, right?
Well, the interesting thing is you've gone through some stuff, but I really find your wording on that pretty interesting and unique. You said you were lucky enough to go through some challenges. Do you have any examples?
Well, I talk about some of this in the book. There's some major touch points in life that were particularly painful and scary and tricky to, stay facing with bravery and really facing it and not running away from it, right? Like when I was in high school, my mom got ovarian cancer. She had stage 4 ovarian cancer, and it was a year almost to the day after my grandmother had died of ovarian cancer. So that was really scary. I was 16, and I didn't have the skills to really navigate that with grace. It was really, really scary and really painful. And my mom almost died, but she did end up kind of on the 11th hour pulling through. She only had a 5% chance of making it. So we really kind of had to accept the fact that she might not make it, but then she made it. And so that was a blessing.
Holy cow.
And it was really, really hard to go through that as a young person. And at the time I had a boyfriend who I was madly in love with, and he really was my rock. He helped me get through my mom's illness. And he was the first person that really made me feel like I was something special, right? Like that first falling in love, where for once you really feel like someone gets you and loves you for you, and the relationship becomes such an important part of your life. So he helped me through my mom's illness, but then he, unfortunately, when I went to college, when I went to Yale, he ended up becoming a drug addict, and I then had to kind of face losing him and not losing myself in the process, and it was really hard since I was so attached to the relationship and really defined myself so deeply based on the relationship. It forced me to have to get to a deeper understanding of who I was and, how to be strong and how to find faith and positivity in the face of such darkness and scary pain. And later in life, becoming a parent and being a wife, it was really much harder than I ever could have anticipated. Marriage is hard and being a parent is hard. So that was the latest, I think, deeper challenge that forced me to find the inner strength and the inner skills to navigate being me and being authentically me, bravely and messily, as you kind of go day to day, to be full of love and laughter and joy and manifesting all that your life can be.
You have a great attitude on the things that have happened to you, and I know it couldn't have been easy. The 5% chance of living of your mother living through the ovarian cancer is got to be really tough to deal with at the time, and that definitely kind of makes you or breaks you, and you could either go around the world after that looking over your shoulder, or you can hold up your head and realize that you can take anything on at that point.
Yeah, and I was lucky in that I was raised, I grew up on a farm. My grandparents were farmers, and there was that kind of grit and resilience, you have to push through no matter what nature throws at you. You have to still, keep pushing through. So I was raised with that mental kind of attitude, for sure, that mindset. And that was a foundation from which I was able to, I guess, kind of navigate, through my challenges. And believe me, it was quite messy. Like my college years, I didn't have the skills to really deal with the pain and the fear that I was kind of dealing with. And so I did a lot of the typical kind of dysfunctional behavior to try to cope. Right. And then obviously those coping strategies, at some point you hit a wall and you say, this is not working for me. I can't continue behaving like this. I need to find another strategy to cope, right? To find a way through the pain. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely had that mindset from the beginning that you need to find that resilience and that grit. And then I kind of had this intellectual drive to really figure it out as philosophically and deeply as possible. And I kept kind of looking inward for that as opposed to looking outward, I guess.
Isn't it funny how humans tend to go for the dysfunctional coping mechanisms before the healthy, forward-facing, functional mechanisms?
Yeah, it is. And I think that unfortunately our society, a lot of the things that our society seems to value and the way that advertising works, the way that a lot of the businesses work, unfortunately those dysfunctional behaviors oftentimes are promoted and glamorized.
Yes.
And it's easier to go in that direction and distract yourself than to kind of dig deep and kind of face the pain and figure out the hard work that we need to do to really be healthy, as opposed to the quick fixes and the magic pills or the distractions that are easier but ultimately don't help us be stronger.
I wonder if there's a bit of a self-castigation drive in there, like maybe something bad is happening to me, so I need to really amplify the negativity of it and hit rock bottom so I can bring myself back again.
I mean, I think that in some ways we all have some limiting beliefs that, through our childhood, no one goes through our childhoods unscathed, right? At some point we're going to be wounded as children where we don't feel good enough and we don't feel safe. And I think fundamentally, on some level, believing that I'm not good enough or believing that I'm not safe, if we have those beliefs in us somewhere, there's part of us that want to kind of manifest that to prove that it's true. And so a lot of the self-destructive behavior, I think, has to do with those limiting beliefs that we may not even be aware that we're carrying around, but subconsciously, if we believe we're not good enough, if we believe that we're not safe, then we will sabotage day to day to kind of like say, see, I was right. Like, see, the world is a bad place. See, I am not worth anything. On some level, either consciously or subconsciously, a lot of that's going on.
And I'm glad you put it that way, because I had a conversation just like that last night with a woman who has been trying to lose weight all her life. She is about 100 pounds or so overweight, and she has accomplished so many things in her life except that, and she absolutely, positively, and acknowledges that she has a limiting belief in weight loss. She does not believe she can do it.
And that is huge. One of the things I say frequently is that there's nothing more important than what we choose to believe is true. And then subconsciously, the work that we do around the subconscious beliefs that we don't even know that we have. So there's so much that's going on in our subconscious that we need to root out and really fight. Like, what do I believe is true? And then refuse to believe anything that's not of service, right? That's not, because it's not true that one of us can't do something. We can do anything. If we may need help, we may need to commit our lives to it. Sometimes I joke, like, it may take several lives, like, who knows? Like, there's more to it. There's so much more to it than we can ever really make sense of. But I mean, believing to the depth of your being that nothing is impossible, I mean, that is huge. Because if we really, on some level, believe that we can't, we will make it so. And if we believe that we can, then we have our best shot, right? It doesn't mean it'll be easy. It doesn't mean we might need, like I said, I joke that it might take several lives, but I still believe it's possible, right? Like, I really believe that anything is possible. And that is huge.
Yeah, I've quoted Henry Ford before, and I'm sure many others have heard this, but, if you believe you can or can't, you're right.
You're right. Yeah.
And it's absolutely true. I've witnessed this with myself. I've experienced that with myself, and I've seen it especially with clients where they're doing great, things are moving, and they're getting better, and they're getting healthier, and then, bam, they sabotage themselves. And I'll ask them, well, why did you do that? Everything was fine. You were happy, satisfied, and all this. And their answer is always, I don't know.
Well, that's the key right there, right? And that's why in my book I talk a lot about our levels of awareness, that we need to keep this kind of, leveling up, because at the end of the day, there's so much that we're not even aware of, and we're always doing our best from our level of awareness. And so that kind of broadening, deepening perspective of what am I aware of that's going on within me? Because at the end of the day, what's going on outside of ourselves is of limited significance of importance. We like to think that it's hugely important, but at the end of the day, that is not what's important. What's important is what's going on inside of ourselves. But most of us have such limited awareness around what's actually going on in there, and that's what's like weighing us down and holding us back, and that's us being in our own way, and we don't even know it.
Yeah, and that's where things like mindfulness and meditation come in handy, because it can help you get in touch with your thoughts and your feelings, and just the fact that, so what, you might have a thought, but it doesn't have to be your life.
Or that you don't have to believe that thought. Like, we have thoughts all the time. Believe me, I mean, I'm very mindful. I meditate. My brain still comes up with an extraordinary amount of unhelpful, untrue thoughts. And I have to be like, nope, not that one. Like, that's not, I refuse to believe that. And it does that. Like, your brain is kind of like a puppy or a monkey. That's like, they talk about those analogies, like your monkey mind. It's like your brain is a puppy, and it's like, over there, squirrel, shiny thing, like, unhelpful thought, like, that person doesn't like you, or you're not good enough. Like, no, I don't believe those thoughts. Those thoughts still are there. I've just gotten really, really skillful in what I believe, what I will allow my attention to follow. And that's my definition of mindfulness, right? Like, if we can be aware of what we're paying attention to and what we're allowing to kind of feed with our attention, because our attention is where the energy flows. And so what we pay attention to is like what we're feeding. And we want to be really, really aware and discerning in what we choose to feed in our mind. It's huge.
I used to use a phrase similar to what you just said when I was doing personal training, and I would say, where your focus goes, your energy flows. And that certainly works with muscles and with athletics, and I've seen it with other people, with myself, time and time and time again. And it absolutely works with the mental side. If you want to get better at math, you put your energy into it, guess what? You get better. If you want to make more money, you put your effort into it and you get better. You put your focus there and the energy flows there.
Yeah. And it's a great segue into kind of the whole premise behind my book and what I had that inspiration to kind of help connect that, exactly what you said. We understand on the physical sense, if you work out your body and you pay attention to that and you practice, you will make progress. You physically will make progress. You may never be the strongest man alive, but you will make progress. Oh, yeah. And mentally, same thing. If you practice, you will get stronger mentally. And inner strength is the exact same thing. If you practice, you will make progress. And the whole premise behind my book is there's 5 core areas of practice that if we pay attention to those 5 areas and just practice it as much as possible, especially when it's easy, all day long, you will level up on your inner strength. And that goes hand in hand with also leveling up on your awareness, because you have to be mindful to be aware of whether you're practicing these inner strength practices, right? And the more you practice, the more mindfully you will kind of have that awareness. And then that's when you start unlocking epiphanies. And that's when things really start to shift and get magical.
Your 5 pillars. Would you like to go over what those 5 areas are, your pillars?
Sure. It was like a natural segue, because you used the almost like exact same analogy that I used to try to explain all this. I was like, perfect timing, Glenn.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the 5 pillars, none of them are earth-shattering or rocket science. I mean, it's all things that we know of. And the first pillar that I'd start with is gratitude, because I think of gratitude almost like our roots. Like, if there were kind of a starting point to our inner strength, gratitude is like that to me. And I don't think anyone would argue with the power of gratitude. We all feel how good it feels and how strong it feels to be grateful, to be in that place of gratitude. But the thing about gratitude is that it's hard to look at, and we talked about this earlier, to look at the challenges in our life, the obstacles. It's hard to stare those in the face and feel grateful for that pain, right? To feel grateful in the face of pain. That's really, really hard to do. Our brain, because of the way it's wired for survival, it's like pain, bad. Pain, go in the opposite direction. Don't be grateful for pain. Go into fight or flight in pain. And so the challenge with gratitude is to stay in that place of gratitude no matter what life is throwing at us, right? Even in the face of things not going well, not going smoothly, things being painful, tragedies. Stay in that place of gratitude, and that will empower us to find the strength to be clear and calm and move through that challenge, rising up out of it, like taking away learning and growth from it instead of getting thrown off course and losing ourselves in whatever the pain or fear of the moment is.
I completely agree with you. Once again, I'll bring myself into this because I'll say I've experimented with this, or I've been aware, I've been mindful of times when I was not feeling very good and sort of, I don't know, just disgruntled in general, and I would bring my awareness to that and say, well, let's kind of go through a list of all the things I'm grateful for, and I start naming them all off. And the problem I've seen, not just with myself, I felt this, and so that's what I'm speaking from, but I'll get to other people in a second, but I could name off all the things I'm grateful for, my wife, my kids, my house, where I live, all of these things, but I don't necessarily feel grateful.
Feel it.
Yeah, and a lot of the people I work with have some sort of physical impairment. Either it's obesity itself, or they have back or knee issues that really prevent them from being as mobile as they would like, and they're in a great deal of pain. And even though they might tick off 20 things they're grateful for, they don't feel grateful because they're in so much pain.
You're hitting the nail on the head, and I talk about this in the chapter, because thinking and feeling obviously are very, very, very different things. And practicing gratitude is not thinking gratitude. Practicing gratitude is feeling gratitude. And so when I talk about how to practice gratitude, I talk about how vital it is to not just think about, I'm grateful for my family, to feel like the gratitude of the cuddles and the smiles and the I love yous, and that when you get home and they run towards you, and how that feels when they run towards you with the hugs. And so that's the shift, where you're getting out of your mind and you're getting kind of into your body or your heart to really feel the gratitude. And so that's the practice. And again, you hit the nail on the head, because it is really hard to start with one of the big things, like to start with an injury or a tragedy or an illness, and to try to feel grateful for that. That's like, what? How? What? But if you start with the things, like you said, that you're grateful for, you're grateful for your family, you're grateful for, having a home, having food, or the things that you're grateful for. So you start with those things that you absolutely can connect with gratitude on, and play with shifting from thinking about gratitude to feeling it. And that means that you can start to use your senses, imagine your senses to connect with the feeling of gratitude. Do you know what I mean by that? When I say that, is that resonating? You can shift to like you said, your family. So shift from thinking that I'm grateful for my family to connecting with how it feels when they give you hugs and kisses. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does to me, because the first thing you said was when you come home and your kids run to you and give you a hug. That is such a powerful feeling. However, for somebody who hasn't had that experience, what would be another example?
So I would say to anybody, right, your life experience, what are you grateful for? Whatever pops into your head that you're grateful for, use that. Then use that and ask myself, what is it about that I am grateful for? How does it feel? What are the feelings associated with it? And start with your 5 senses. Start with how it looks, how it smells, how it feels on your skin, and start connecting through your 5 senses to what that thought was. So if someone said, well, look, I'm grateful that the sun's out today. All right, well, why? What is it about the sun shining that feels good that you can connect with that gratitude, right? So you can say, well, I see it, and it's bright. Okay, well, what's that feel like in you, right? Do you see what I'm going with this?
It feels
as
warm.
Long as there's one thing that pops into your head that you can think that you're grateful for, that is the path to then transition to the feeling around that thing. So not to think it, but to feel it. And you can connect through your 5 senses, and then you will start to feel how that feels in your body and in your heart. So as long as you can think of one thing, It doesn't matter if it's family, if it's the sun, if it's, well, someone smiled at me. Like, well, that person was nice. I'm grateful for that. Like, whatever little thing, that's the pathway to then start to shift. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you for expanding on that one. So what's your second pillar?
So the second pillar is compassion. And compassion is super important to kind of peel back and really understand and connect with, because I think it's a tricky kind of concept that, like, you know, we know the term compassion will be compassionate. Most people just kind of think of like kindness, like being kind. And there's a lot of resistance. I think in general, people have some discomfort around the idea of compassion kind of universally, right? That like, well, sometimes people are deserving of it, but sometimes there's not, like people aren't, right? I think that one of the things that happens with compassion is that people kind of get stuck in their head. And so there's a couple of things that are really important around compassion. The first is compassion is not something that you connect with in your head, kind of much like gratitude, the conversation we just had. Compassion is something that you feel in your heart. And so you can't ever look at someone and judge whether they're being compassionate or not. And you also can't judge yourself whether you're being compassionate, because that's thinking. Like when we're judging, we're thinking. And it's something that we feel. And it's tricky because it's not always in action. So the compassionate thing isn't always to be kind or to be generous. Like one of my friends challenged me on this. He's like, well, does that mean I always have to give money to every beggar on the street? And I'm like, no, not at all. The compassionate thing might not be to provide. And actually just yesterday, an alcoholic, I know he was an alcoholic because he told me, he came up to me. I was trying to catch something on my phone and like figure out where the heck I was going. And he came up and asked me for money. And he was very respectful and he was very honest. He said he was an alcoholic and he really just needed money for alcohol. And I didn't give him money. I gave him compassion, and I actually had a conversation with him about alcoholism. I have some people in my life that struggle with alcohol, and I can deeply connect compassionately with that struggle. But it did not feel right. It did not feel compassionate actually to give him money for alcohol. And I feel that in my heart. And at the end of the day, we are the only ones in any given moment that can feel whether or not we're in a place of compassion or whether we're not. And I guess I kind of hit both points in one, in that it's not something that you can think, it's something that you feel, and it's not something that you can kind of judge whether you always have to act kindly. Like the kind thing isn't necessarily to do something. The kind thing may be to be in your heart and not act, not enable, and to stay open-hearted and loving, non-judgmental. And you can feel it in your heart that your heart is open. I felt that I wasn't judging him. I didn't feel better than him. He is a human being who's struggling with a lot of the same stuff that I've struggled with and people that I love struggle with. He's in a different place in his journey and dealing with it, but I'm no better than him. I'm a human being. He's a human being. We're all, as far as I'm concerned, completely on even playing field and equally, spiritual beings. So I felt that in my heart that I was being compassionate, but someone could have walked by and been like, you didn't give him money. You're supposedly this compassionate being. Like, no, they're stuck in their head right then, being judgmental. Like no one else can ever judge someone else's compassion, something that we can feel, if that makes any sense.
It sure does. And
Yay.
it really does. And I'm going back to a conversation I recently had, and it's interesting, this fad of judgment we're going through these days, and I think it really started, or maybe not started, but took off exponentially with social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., and how easy it is to look at a picture. It's definitely amplified. How easy it is to look at a photo of someone and pass judgment. Oh, they look hot. Oh, they look not. Oh, they're fat. Oh, they're too skinny. Oh, they look smart. Oh, they look dumb. All these sorts of judgments that you can make in a second. And the real problem with that is you probably don't know a thing about their life. And obese people get this attitude all the time, and it's with all of the politically correct language that's going about. We're not supposed to call people that have physical disabilities by these kind of not so nice names anymore, labels, and we're really have come a long way since I was a kid at accepting people that are different from ourselves. But obese people have escaped that. They are still being judged
the stigma.
quite often.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody, and she told me that she was eating a meal at some sort of public gathering, and somebody said to her, I don't understand why you're so big if you eat like that all the time. So she was obviously eating a small, healthy food, small portions, reasonable portions anyways. And this person just came right out and said that, and they probably didn't understand that they were being really cruel, and understanding the plight that she's been going through trying to lose weight.
Yeah, and you just touched on so many important things in that one story. So if you don't mind staying with that story, because that story I think is just such a great example that we can use to kind of illuminate a lot of what I'm trying to explain in the book. Because you also, by talking about judgment, so the fifth pillar, we're going to skip to that, because the fifth pillar is openness and curiosity. And so I dive deep into judgment on that kind of chapter in that pillar, but it goes hand in hand. All these pillars go hand in hand with each other. Because obviously, if we're being judgmental, it cuts off our compassion. And so that's why, sometimes we'll be stuck not being compassionate, and we can kind of look at, gosh, I'm having such a hard time right now. Imagine someone who's looking at an overweight person, and they're a human being, so they're imperfect, and they're looking at an overweight human being, and they're stuck, and they're having trouble being compassionate. If that person practiced my 5 pillars, it could be like, gosh, I'm mindful right now that I'm having trouble being compassionate. What's going on? And then they could be like, oh, wait, the 5th pillar is openness and curiosity, and I'm being judgmental right now. Look at that. And it's cutting off my compassion. And so on one side, we could say that the person who made this observation, asked this question, perhaps they weren't being compassionate, perhaps they were being judgmental, or perhaps they weren't aware, right? And they actually were being compassionate and were trying to be loving and validating that you're making great choices, you're doing great things, and I'm confused, I don't understand, and they want to understand. And so sometimes, because of our sensitivities and our traumas, which anyone who I think has had a lifetime or any period of time being overweight has been traumatized by the way that they've been treated. I was overweight for maybe like a year after I had kids. I'm a very small person, so I'm like a size 0 now, and that's my kind of natural size. I'm just a small person. My bones are small. But I was a size 10, 12 for probably about a year after I had kids. And I know that that's still in the scheme of things not, morbidly obese, but I was quite big because I was tiny on top and my bottom. I was like a size 0 on top and a size 10, 12 on the bottom. So that was my shape. I was very pear-shaped.
It's much different for you.
And so I've experienced a tiny bit of that, and I experienced even more what I was doing to myself during those times. I really was not compassionate with myself. I was very judgmental and cruel with myself during that time, and that was traumatizing for me. So I know that I was traumatized, and I was extra sensitive because of that trauma to people saying things that maybe they didn't mean anything. Maybe they were coming from a place of compassion, they were being loving, but the words they chose or the timing with which they said it was just not good, and it hurt, right? So that's another complexity in all of this, because this is all it's all a big kind of woven kind of knot of, things that are traumatic and trauma and painful, and then things that are misunderstood, things that are poorly communicated, right? A lot of the things that I talk about in the book has to do with skillfulness around all of these practices, being skillful in our communication so we can communicate compassionately, and we can communicate when the time is right and that it's helpful and that it's necessary. There's that acronym from Buddhism, think, is it timely? Is it helpful? Or is it honest? Is it, kind? Is it necessary? Is it inspiring? That acronym to choose whether or not we speak. That's really important. It's skillful to be mindful about when and how we speak. And then being mindful of our judgments, like you talked about, and being mindful of, am I being compassionate right now, or am I being judgmental? So that story, I think, touches on a bunch of really important skills and practices that are opportunities for us to grow and get stronger, both kind of on the giving and the receiving end of something like that, right? If that makes sense?
Absolutely. It sure does. And I just, for the sake of the audience who's not looking at your book right now, I want to kind of go over the 5 pillars to kind of keep some organization so that,
It's hard. They're not linear. That's what's hard.
Well, I know what it's like when you're driving, listening to something. You're like, wait a minute, which one are we on now?
What number was that?
So
my dad even always says, he's like, you gotta give me a couple times through the book, like repeat them again. Like, okay, number 1 is gratitude. Number 2 is compassion. And then we can go to number 3. Number 3 is courage, which is obviously vital. And I'll say number 4, since we're just trying to right now be organized. Number 4 is surrender, which we can talk about in a minute. And then number 5 is openness and curiosity. So those are the 5 pillars, and they all support each other, right? And if you're stuck on one, if you start working on one of the others, it'll loosen it up. And so if you're struggling with gratitude, you can work on the others. Am I being open and curious right now? Like that's oftentimes what's keeping us from being grateful or being compassionate.
Nice. Tell us about courage. I don't understand how courage has anything to do with any of this.
Okay. So, if we are stuck on gratitude, or we're stuck on compassion, or we're stuck on surrender, or we're stuck being open and curious, the problem may lie that we are stuck on courage. And so practicing courage, being brave, looking at our fears, which will always be with us. There's no such thing as being a human being and being fearless, unless there's, I think, some psychological or brain thing they're studying right now with on one person. But for most of us, fear is an integral part of being human. And if we are not able to skillfully navigate that fear with our courage and move forward in the face of our fears, the other areas of our life will get blocked. So oftentimes when we're stuck and we are feeling unhappy and we're feeling disempowered, the issue is that we are not being brave. We're not finding courage. We have fear either consciously or subconsciously, and it's making us go into fight or flight, and we're getting stuck. So practicing courage, especially when it's easy, when it's little things that pop up, day in and day out, practicing skillfully navigating our fears, which means that when we have thoughts that trigger us, we have a thought that then we can kind of feel that kind of fight or flight reaction start to happen. Our heart starts to pound. We may start to feel butterflies in our stomach. We may start to have our brain kind of quicken in its kind of analysis and concern and worry and anxiety, which we are definitely living amidst an anxiety epidemic in our country. So I will go out on a limb and say that everyone can relate on some level to, this chronic state of anxiety where you don't even necessarily know what it is that you're afraid of, but you just have this sense of fear in you. To get to a place of skillfully navigating that, where we can really discern between thoughts that we believe, which we talked about this in the beginning, right? When we have a thought, is that thought true? Is there a deeper level of questioning that I can look at around that thought? Figure out, is this true? Like, suppose an example of, going into fight or flight in my book, I talk about like hearing a loud noise in my house. Like I was home alone with my kids, my husband was traveling or at work, and I heard a loud bang downstairs. Unskillfully navigating that fear, as I would have immediately gone into fight or flight, and my brain would have started going on overdrive on all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs. There could be a burglar. I'd get certain that there was someone in the house, that something was terrifying that I needed to, deal with. And I would get myself super worked up around things that weren't even true. And I would get myself paralyzed. And when I was younger, I did struggle with anxiety, so I can really relate to this, getting myself literally paralyzed in fear. And I wouldn't even be able to move, and I'd be terrified. Skillfully navigating the fear, how I handle it now, I'll hear the bang, I'll observe that I start to go into fight or flight, and I'll mindfully start to navigate, what can I really know about the situation? Well, I know there was a bang. Do I hear anything now? What are the most likely causes of that bang? Like, how likely is it? I mean, we have an alarm. The alarm is still on, so nothing got tripped. No one came in. Is it likely that there's someone in the house? No, how can I safely figure this out? How can I safely get more information? And I really am careful to be like, what makes sense? Does this make sense? And how can I get more information safely? And so I kind of like carefully, quietly go down. Do I hear anything else? No, there's absolutely no more sound. I get down in the kitchen and one of the blinds fell off the window. I'm like, okay, so then I deal with it. But like, that's the difference between skillfully navigating fear and finding courage in the face of our fears or not. And the thing about our lives now is that we get triggered all the time by things that aren't even real, things that aren't even in the present moment. There wasn't even a bang. It was just someone looked at you funny, and that reminded you of something that happened, when you were younger and people weren't respectful, or someone asks you a question and they meant it in this completely innocuous, not having to do with anything way, but because of some trauma that you have or a memory that you have, you take it in this very judgmental, mean way, and you get triggered into this nasty place, and you're spending the rest of the day fuming on what a jerk that person was. And they were just asking you if you were free for dinner, like that level of skillfulness or lack of skillfulness is something that most of us don't have a lot of awareness and practice around.
My word, I have a lot of things to say on that.
Great.
Lay
it on me, Glenn.
That was fantastic. And while you were talking, I had, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I had a bit of a, revelation or epiphany with what you're saying here. And what I'm seeing, and like I say, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing you have the 5 pillars, and coincidentally enough, you have courage in the middle, and I see that as tying the others together, because you really have to have courage to look within yourself and look at the truth. Do you have compassion? Yes. Will you have compassion for this perfect stranger? Can you have gratitude even though your back is broken and you feel miserable?
And you feel like you can't go on. Like there's not going to be anything else positive in your life, right?
Yeah.
Like you feel that. Like, can you bravely face it? Even if every day sucks.
Right.
Even if there's so much pain in every day, can you bravely face that, right?
Surrendering, I think, is pretty obvious how courage fits in with that, and also the openness. I'm not sure about the curiosity is not quite as obvious. But I was also thinking that back to the kind of the talking about and at overweight people and really not respecting and not having the compassion for them, what they're going through. I'm wondering if that's not one of the cases of throwing stones to deflect sort of the opinion at you. Like liars, people who lie a lot often accuse others of lying. People that steal accuse others of stealing as a way of deflecting any criticism of them. So perhaps these people who see the obese person and feel a certain unpleasant feeling and maybe even go so far as to say something or say something out loud are themselves terrified of becoming overweight.
Yeah, absolutely. And terrified of not being good enough, right? I think fundamentally underneath all of it is that, right? Not being good enough, not being worthy of love, feeling shame. Shame, Brené Brown. I love Brené Brown. If you don't know Brené Brown, check out Brené Brown. But she defines shame as, feeling not worthy of connection, right? Feeling not worthy of love. And so, that shame, we all have that in us. Like no one has gone, like I said, no one's gone through their childhood, no matter how great your childhood was. No one made it through without feeling shame at some point, feeling that you're just not worthy of love, that you're not good enough. And so that triggers that in people, right? That they have that judgment and that deflection, and they throw stones to not feel their own sense of shame. They'd rather, knock someone else down to make them feel better. I mean, that's a coping mechanism that hopefully, we are aware of and outgrow, like in middle school, but a lot of people don't. I mean, there's a lot of adults that I see behaving in that very kind of immature way of, I don't feel that great about myself, so I'm going to knock someone else down so I can feel better about myself and not face the things about myself that I don't like. I mean, that's like, unfortunately, a coping mechanism that a lot of people still employ even into adulthood.
It's pretty weak. It's pretty cheap, and I see it every day.
It's sad, and I say sad not in a judgmental sense, but it's sad because you know that those people are suffering, and they're not getting better. Like they're not behaving in ways that are allowing themselves to heal and rise up. Right? So they're behaving in ways that are actually making their lives worse and manifesting more miserableness and more suffering. And so to me, it's sad because it's pain and it's suffering that is just continuing, as opposed to pain and suffering saying, okay, yeah, I am in pain right now. I do feel ashamed of what happened. Let me shift that to guilt, and how can I change my behavior to make it better? Right? But people who are throwing stones at others, they're doing that as they are stuck in that low level of suffering, and they're not behaving in ways that are making it better. And so to me, I find it very, very sad. And in a because I don't judge, right? It's my fifth pillar. I practice non-judgment. And so to me, I find it sad, and it helps me mindfully not take it personally when people behave that way, because it's their suffering that's spilling over and they're dumping it on me, and it's not okay. And I set up boundaries and I don't enable it, and I will call people out if I need to, right? But at the end of the day, I don't take it personally because I know it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with them and their stuff.
Now, I want to hear how surrender fits in with this, because on the surface it sounds like, well, if I'm trying to improve my health, if I have 100 pounds to lose, why would I surrender?
Yeah, and that's the thing about surrender, right? That word got me stuck for so long. Because again, I was raised in this farm with this like gritty, resilient, I'm never giving up. I can make anything happen. Anything is possible. And surrender seemed to be like the opposite of that. And so I was really confused when I first started encountering this concept of surrender in a lot of philosophical and spiritual books. I was like, I don't get it. That's the opposite of what I want to do. I am not giving up. I'm going to make this happen. But that's not what surrender means in this use. So again, it's a word. All these words can mean anything, right? But when I say surrender, and what surrender means in this book and in a lot of the, the spiritual and philosophical texts and teachings, it is the serenity of saying, this is out of my control, and I'm going to allow whatever other forces are at work to contribute to making this better. So you're not giving up anything. You're allowing this kind of collaborative, greater life force that is at work to do some of this heavy lifting and to stay open to how it turns out, right? So like if there are people in your life that are struggling with their health or with alcoholism, for example, it is not something that we have the power to fix. So the surrender is saying, you know what? This is not something that I can change, and continuing to try and change it is going to make me miserable and make them miserable. And it's just kind of this toxic kind of trying to force something that is not something that is in my control. And the gift of surrender is being able to say, I have faith that this is going to kind of work out however it's meant to, and whatever bigger purpose. And I kind of use this kind of bigger tapestry of life, that sometimes there's darkness and sometimes there's lightness, and there's this complexity that we can't always make sense of, but I can find this trust, this faith, this surrender, that it's going to flow as it's meant to. And this is not where my work is meant to go. I'm not meant to be banging my head against the wall on this. This is something that I need to surrender on. And that's the subtle shift, if that makes sense.
Yes, it sure does. And I've had similar conversations with clients, and it is subtle and sometimes difficult to really understand the difference between giving up and acceptance. And I think that's where surrender comes in, accepting
yes.
who you are, how you are, but yet not settling for your current state and striving for better. I accept who I am, but I want more, and it sounds like a contradiction.
Well, the thing about it, and I forget what teacher it was that explained it. It may be Vishen Lakhani. He has a book called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind that is an awesome book.
Right.
I think it was him, and I could be wrong, but I think he's the one who explained. So there's these two super important parts that both are absolutely important to keep our eye on, and our mind and our heart on at all times. One is the present moment, and really blissfully accepting, gratefully surrendering, compassionately loving, being open to everything that is in the present moment. Like, is this what's really going on right here and right now? Is this real? Is this what's going on? Yes. Accepting that kind of, and being in this blissful appreciation for, even in the challenges of this present moment, there's so much to be grateful for. And feeling that bliss of the present moment. Simultaneously having this vision for the future. And this vision of, I don't know how exactly I'm going to get there, but I see this greatness in the future. And I see this growth opportunity. And I believe in it. And I see it. And it's equally bright and beautiful as this current moment. And sometimes the current moment is tough, right? So sometimes the current moment isn't so bright and beautiful. But still finding that acceptance, at least for the present moment, whatever it is, while having this vision for the future. And, it's really important to shift a little bit from this kind of concept of desire. And I talk about this in later chapters of my book, the difference between desire and the desires that sometimes weigh us down and are toxic, because they're rooted in this kind of concept of the present moment isn't good enough. Like, the present moment isn't good enough. I desire more. Like, this isn't good enough, right? That kind of concept. And a lot of our desires are rooted in that kind of either conscious or subconscious assessment that the present moment isn't good enough. And that is an unhealthy and untrue assessment, right? And so those desires will end up kind of weighing us down. That's different than how I define this vision for the future. Because this vision is great, big, beautiful, bright vision, while also having this acceptance and gratitude of the present moment, if that makes sense.
It sure does. I was just looking at your table of contents in your book, and so that was chapter 9 you were just referencing, desire and pride.
Yeah.
You have one about anger, our lowest states, awareness, perspective, and epiphanies. Which brings me up to chapter 5, openness and curiosity. Now, openness sounds almost like a synonym for surrender. Can you explain how openness and curiosity are a pillar and how openness is different than surrender?
Yeah, good question. So, openness and curiosity is this idea that we cannot ever know everything that there is to know about anything, both present and future. So surrender to me is kind of about this fight of kind of good enough and the acceptance, right? Openness is kind of a counterpart to acceptance, because it's kind of this future and additional layer of awareness work, whereas surrender is like kind of the counterpoint of like not working anymore, that like not working, and then the openness and the curiosity is working. And so they go hand in hand, but they're kind of the counterpoints to each other, if that makes sense. So the openness and the curiosity is kind of like this outward or deepening of information, of assessment, of growth, whereas the surrender is like this loosening and relaxing. And so they go hand in hand, but both are really important, because if you just surrender, but you don't keep the openness and curiosity, then you can get stuck.
And there lies the need for courage. If we're looking at ourselves, why we are hanging on to these poor health habits or whatever we're talking. I keep using that as an example because that's my world.
Yeah.
And this can relate with anything. But let's say a person is smoking and they don't want to. They know it's killing them. Everyone around them wants them to quit, but they don't have the courage to look inside at what is really at the root of it, why they're really doing it, beyond the chemical addiction.
Right.
That definitely does take some courage. Or obesity, too. Why do I overeat? Well, I don't want to. Well, something about you does.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the subconscious, limiting beliefs and traumas that we have in there. And I always say it's either, to me, in my assessment of things, it's either a trauma, like something got hurt, there's a wound there, or there's an ignorance. So either we're identifying with something as being true that's not true, or there's a wound that we are not able to heal yet, and we're avoiding that because it hurts. And so what happens is, because we're avoiding the pain of it, we then won't go there, And I think that's what you're speaking to, this idea of like, I'm not going to go there because it's too painful, and you need the courage to go there, and you need the openness and the curiosity to go there.
Yeah, you definitely do. That curiosity, the courage to approach it, the openness to crack it open, and the curiosity to kind of figure out what's going on with it, because you can't really change it, repair it without all those things. You have to surrender to it. You have to accept it. But then that willingness to change
hopping back to compassion.
Hopping back to compassion,
yeah, because forgiveness, just to touch on that for a second, I mean, forgiveness, obviously, it's an age-old concept. It is so huge. It is so huge, and it is hard. Our mind cannot make sense of forgiveness. Our mind thinks that by forgiving, we are going to end up weaker. We're going to end up more vulnerable. Our mind can't make sense of the healing and the empowerment that comes with forgiveness. And so that's why the practice of getting out of our mind and into our heart, where we can forgive and find that space, and understanding that doesn't necessarily mean you let the person close again, right? Like, repairing trust is different from forgiveness, which is another really important thing to understand, that you can forgive someone without repairing the trust and without saying, okay, you can come close again. But the forgiveness is for our own healing, our own kind of taking our power back. So we say, you know what, I've forgiven you. You can't trigger this pain and fear anymore because I forgave you. And you have to stay over there until you repair trust and you prove that you can come close. But you're taking your power back and you're healing, and that is integral in all of this. And again, you can't forgive without courage. You can't go there without openness and curiosity, because most of us don't even realize what the wounds are that we're still holding on to and haven't forgiven. So we need to be open and curious, like, why did that trigger me so badly when that person said that? Why does when that person come close, I feel so uncomfortable? That openness and that curiosity, and then the courage to go into those dark places, because that's where the pain and the fear is.
And what's interesting about that is, back to a Buddhist lesson, is when you are angry at someone or hold some sort of animosity, it's like holding a hot coal in your hand. It hurts you, but it doesn't hurt them. And I had a situation the other day. I was riding my bike, and there was a car on the opposite side of the street about to pull out crosswise, so straight across the street. And the road was clear. I'm watching this car because I knew that he was going to go straight onto the road that was perpendicular to me, right? It was an intersection.
Right.
I didn't have a stop sign. They did. So they waited and waited and waited until like the very last second. Then they darted across right in front of me. I had to slam on my brakes. It wasn't really a danger that I would have been hit, but I did feel like I had to slam on my brakes.
Yeah.
And it was some teenage boys in there, and they're laughing, and I was incensed. I was so ticked off that they did this, and so I'm like down the road for the next several minutes, and then I stopped and I took a breath and I realized what I was doing, and I realized I had a hot coal in my hand, and it wasn't going to change anything in their world, not a single thing, no matter how long I held on to that coal, no matter how hot it was. So I let it go, and these things that you're discussing, pretty much not in this language per se, but they did enter my mind, and I eventually dropped that coal and said, well, that's their problem, not mine.
Yeah, and it's hardest when you feel threatened, right? Like when it was actually scary, like if there was a threat. Yeah. It's hardest when you know that the people were actually being jerks, right? I don't know if I can swear on your swear on your podcast, but that, like, because sometimes, like, well, maybe it was a mistake. Like, what a good practice, like when you're driving, like you never know when someone like is driving really fast. Like maybe I always say, like maybe they're trying to get to the hospital, like they're a doctor, or maybe their parent or their child is sick and they're trying to get to the hospital. You can't ever really know. And so I always kind of have that conversation in my head, assuming that, well, maybe they're a jerk, but maybe they're trying to get somewhere. But like if you actually see their faces and know that they're just being jerks, then it's that much harder to let it go. Because then it's really hard not to judge. Like, well, you're a jerk. Like you actually are a jerk. But then there's always the additional layers of that I talk about in the book of that openness and curiosity. Like, well, why are they jerks? Maybe they're jerks because their parents abused them and no one's ever loved them, and they don't even know what it means to have compassion and kindness and how sad that is for them, right? Like there's all these infinite layers that one can go to be non-judgmental and be compassionate, find compassion even in the face of someone behaving like a complete and utter jerk. like when people act like that, it's because of something, right? Like
Sure.
I intrinsically believe that people are as kind and as functional as they're able to be, and if people aren't able to be that, it's because they're ill in some way. And there's physical illness, there's mental illness, and I believe there's spiritual illness. And I define spiritual illness as when people's spirits get so low that they're so stuck in this low level of shame and guilt and anger, and they don't feel good about themselves. Like that can then cause, first of all, mental health issues. But they're ill, like they're suffering. And I find compassion in the face of even incredibly toxic behavior because they're ill. And I don't judge, I surrender, I find compassion, and that empowers me. It's not about doing anything for them. If we can find compassion in the face of behavior like that, we feel better. Like we are empowered in that moment. I talk about that a lot in the book too, because it doesn't weaken us to be compassionate. It empowers us to be compassionate.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about weakening, because as I'm riding my bike along this road and I'm having this conversation in my head, I was resistant to accepting it and having compassion and forgiveness, because I did feel that would weaken me. I needed to be tough. It was a somewhat physical threat. I know they did it intentionally, but once I passed that hump, once I said, look, I'm only going to eat myself up inside. I'm going to do myself harm. I'm going to cause my stress level to go up. There is zero reason to hang on to this, and there's all the reasons to let it go. As long as I continue to be aware and alert of cars on the road, I don't want to forget that situation and and get hit someday. So I need to keep my awareness up when I ride, which I always do. So that wasn't the issue. So what I'm getting at is, once I got over that hump of it's okay to forgive that, I did not feel weaker. I actually felt stronger and uplifted and lighter, and I started smiling. Crazy.
Yeah, and again, it's so counter. I say counterintuitive. Our intuition actually knows it's counter reason. Our brain can't make sense of it, and so we use the word counterintuitive all the time. But really, I think most of the time when we say counterintuitive, we're saying like counter logic. It doesn't really make sense, because it makes sense to our brain that we have to stay angry to stay strong. That's what our brain thinks, but it's not true. And our intuition, actually, if we get in touch with our intuition knows that we're empowered when we forgive, that we come back to center and we come back to standing on firm ground, where we then can handle future threats with efficiency and with effectiveness. Like if you look at like Bruce Lee, the ancient, people that were just astounding. Like if you read any of Bruce Lee's stuff, and he is arguably one of the most superhuman, martial arts fighters. This is the exact same stuff that he talks about, that by staying centered, you are much more effective at anything that you go to do, including handle threats.
Exactly. And I don't want to be weak, and I don't want to be a doormat and be walked on by everybody. So that's
boundaries. Boundaries are a whole other conversation. You set boundaries.
Right. And that's kind of, and maybe mixing up those boundaries and understanding what has already happened and can't be undone, and what is going to happen and can be changed. So have we finished openness and curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a whole chapter's worth of stuff, so we can talk about openness and curiosity for 5 hours. But yeah, I mean, I think that the big takeaway from openness and curiosity is that we can never know everything there is to know. So we want to be an investigator and assess the situation and not judge. Don't put your head in the sand. Keep assessing. Keep asking questions, and just don't judge. Don't ever think that you know enough to say right or wrong, good or bad. Things are not black and white, and so that's kind of the big, bullet point under openness and curiosity. That's really important to remember, because it's empowering. It'll help you navigate your life with more strength, and you'll be happier.
This is fantastic stuff, Pamela. You have gratitude, compassion, courage, surrender, and openness/curiosity. And it's all tucked away in this fairly small book. It's pretty thin, not quite the size of a pocket book, but it could certainly carry in your hand or purse in your car, sitting on your desk pretty easily. And I see this as a really great guide for life, and maybe read and reread just to keep it fresh in your mind. And certainly something that if you take at a young age can positively affect and and improve your life. The sooner you read it, the sooner your life can change.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. I don't know if you know, I wrote the book actually in 2 weeks. I was just inspired to write it.
Holy cow.
And share. So it wasn't something that I really planned to do. I wrote the book, quit my job, and just transitioned to kind of doing this work. And I love, to me, this is my life's work. There's nothing more important to me than sharing these skills, these tools, and then allowing people to figure it out for themselves. Because at the end of the day, each of us has to do this work for ourselves. You are the only person who can know, whether you're in touch with your truth. If we're looking around externally to see whether we're on the right track, we are not going to be on our track. Right? We're going to be on other people's tracks, and that's going to take away from our energy and our brilliance. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about all this and sharing the stuff about the book. And I really do love talking to people about this. So if anyone wanted to connect with me, you can go to my website, and I love hearing from people, love talking to people. Since I just started out doing this, I have, flexibility and time, for more one-on-one stuff than I probably will soon. So anyone who wants to ever talk to me, pop me an email, give me a call. I love talking about this stuff.
That's wonderful. I will, of course, have links on the show notes page of livefitpodcast.com. But for those who are listening right now and want to take a note, where can they get your book, and what is your website?
Sure. So my book is on Amazon, Find More Strength, and my website is goldevolution.com. And there's lots of free stuff on there. There's a free chapter
and you have a special page. And sorry for
no.
You have a special page for LiveFit listeners, goldevolution.com/livefit.
Yes, and so you can get a free meditation there, the free chapter of my book. And there's also a breathing guide, because breathing is this really powerful tool that I just recently learned how we can use that to kind of get our mind under control.
It's amazing how powerful breathing can be.
Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
Pamela, it has been an unbelievable pleasure hearing all about these techniques that you've thrown together in one nice, small book, not tiny. And I truly do think this can help everybody of all ages, all sizes, all careers. Go out and buy this book, Find More Strength by Pamela Gold.
Thanks so much, Glenn.
That didn't sound too promo-y, did it?
No, I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I feel like we had such a great conversation, and I'm really happy to share all this stuff. I really appreciate it.
Well, I really wasn't trying to promote your book so you sell it. I truly believe that this book can help people, so I want them I want to be very clear on that it's really good, honest, true stuff to essentially heal your spirit and keep a strong spirit.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's definitely how I feel about it too, and the feedback I've gotten on it has been really humbling, and feels very kind of in alignment with what I know is my life's work. So I really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot coming from you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.